You know, when we think about history, our minds usually jump to, well, kings and generals and big epic battles, right? But what if the real main character in our story was something else entirely? A force so small you can't even see it. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of the virus that literally rewrote history. I mean, think about it for a second. When you look at the ruins of these massive empires, places like Rome or the Aztec civilization, you have to wonder what really brought them down? What's the true engine that drives all this massive historical change?
So, what's the usual answer? Swords clashing on a battlefield, right? Or maybe some brilliant political move, or, a disastrous one? Or is it just the slow, grinding gears of the economy doing its thing?
And look, all of those things are huge parts of the story, for sure. But what if the single most powerful weapon, the biggest revolutionary force of all, was something completely different? Something you can't see, you can't hear, but is absolutely devastating.
Yeah, that invisible, devastating force, it's disease. So for our first section, we're gonna look at how these plagues that forged nations did so much more than just cause death. They completely rewired society itself.
All right, let's start with a big one. Probably the most infamous event in human history, the Black Death. Now, we usually think of it as just this awful, dark chapter of pure destruction, an end for millions. But that's really only half the story. Because out of those ashes, something totally new was about to grow. And to really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number, 200 million. That's the estimated death toll. In Europe alone, the plague wiped out nearly half the population in just a couple of years. It was a catastrophe on a level that's, well, it's almost impossible for us to even wrap our heads around. So what happens after something like that? Well, the consequences were revolutionary, seriously. So before the plague, you had this really rigid feudal system, right? Serfdom, fixed wages, you couldn't really move up. But after, well, with so many workers gone, the survivors suddenly found they had all the power. This massive labor shortage meant wages went up, and you started seeing peasant revolts against the old system. The plague didn't just kill people, it completely shattered the economic foundation of feudalism, and in its place, it planted the very first seeds of modern capitalism. Now, this incredible power that disease has to just completely reshape a continent, we saw it happen again, and this time, maybe even more brutally, during the colonization of the Americas. Here, disease wasn't just some force for social change, it was conquest's invisible weapon. Take a look at this. This chart shows what many call the Great Dying, and it's one of the biggest demographic disasters in all of human history. In 1492, the estimated population in the Americas was about 60 million. Just think about that number. By 1650, it had collapsed to around 6 million. That is a 90% drop. And if those numbers are hard to picture, this quote from an Aztec account, it just brings the horror right into focus. They were describing the very first smallpox epidemic, and they wrote, "They died in heaps, like bedbugs. They could not walk, they could not move, they could not stir." It's a chilling reminder that behind every single one of those statistics, there was just immense personal suffering. So here's the crucial point, right? The European conquerors, they had guns, they had horses, they had steel, sure, but their single most effective weapon, it was one they didn't even know they were carrying. Diseases like smallpox and measles, things the indigenous populations had absolutely no immunity to. They just hollowed out these huge established empires. They did what armies alone never, ever could have. Okay, so we've seen how viruses can shape whole societies from the outside, but their influence goes even deeper than that. I mean, way deeper. They also rewrote our history from the inside. So in this next section, we're gonna uncover the history inside us and find out how viruses literally became a part of our DNA. To really get this, we need to talk about a very specific kind of virus. They're called endogenous retroviruses, or ERVs for short. And what are they? Well, to put it simply, they're basically ancient viral DNA. We're talking millions of years ago, these little bits of code managed to stitch themselves permanently into our ancestors' genome. So how much of our DNA are we actually talking about here? You might be surprised. It's an incredible 8%. Just let that sink in for a moment. 8%. Nearly a tenth of the genetic code that makes you, is basically the fossilized remains of ancient viruses. It's wild. So how in the world does a virus actually become a permanent part of us? Well, it's this fascinating three-step process. First up, you have the infection. A retrovirus has to infect a reproductive cell, like a sperm or an egg. Then, step 2 is integration. The virus literally injects its own genetic code right into that cell's DNA. And finally, the last step is inheritance. If that specific cell goes on to create an offspring, that viral DNA gets passed down and down and down through the generations, until it's just a permanent part of the species' genome. It's kind of like a ghost in our machine, isn't it? And you know, understanding this super deep biological history is so important because it tells us so much about our future. Which brings us to our final question. What is history's next chapter? So after all this, what's the big takeaway? I think it's that we really need to change the way we think about viruses. They're not just germs that make us sick. No, they are powerful agents of change. They are a force that has shaped societies, brought down empires, and built new economies. And maybe the most incredible part of all, they're a fundamental piece of our own evolution, literally written into our genes. And all of that leaves us with one last, really important question to think about. We've seen over and over again how this tiny, invisible force has completely rewritten our past. So, you have to ask yourself, what is the next virus writing for our future?